This time look at 5 of the most ugly bikes currently in production. Now, as they say, beauty is indeed in the eye of the beholder, but the fact is some things are just plain ugly, and so it is today with so many production motorcycles, especially the Japanese ones. Some of them look like they're transformer toys that have been smashed up by a sledgehammer, while others have the look of grossly exaggerated manga art that's been smashed up by a sledgehammer. And while it's definitely possible that for some modern designs to look incredibly stylish, far too often the designers of Japanese bikes in particular, although not exclusively, do seem to get it wrong. Here are 5 really gross examples. The Honda Rebel. Now, while it's true that Honda generally don't make really hideous bikes, they do make quite a lot of bikes that are fairly bland, and the NT1100 is a great example of this. Sure, it's functional, sure it looks okay and inoffensive, but it doesn't look very interesting. The front headlamps aren't bad, but it just doesn't inspire, does it? Honda's Rebel 500, however, is on a completely different level. Sure, it's a low cruiser, and from the back doesn't look too bad. It's just from the side. The frame and the tank don't really seem to go together. It looks like something that somebody's knocked up on a sort of whim. The exhaust hangs too low, and generally they're creating some sort of cruiser, but to be perfectly frank, they've gone about it in a rather lazy-ass way. The frame owes far too much to the other bikes in their 500 range, while the tank and seat section has more than the whiff of afterthought about them. Now, from a functionality point of view, the bike works really well, if you ignore that slightly dodgy ground clearance. The seat height is very low. Now, Tom's girlfriend, who is not tall at all, can flat foot on this bike, but when I suggested that it might make her a really good bike in the future, she said, "Not for me, it looks a bit crap." And that's the great tragedy of this bike. It's well designed, well thought out, it's accessible to people who are really small, and has pretty good performance as well, and excellent fuel economy. But for me, the frame, the tank and the seat all seem like they've been mashed up on a computer from a completely different bike, giving the fuel tank the appearance of a launching ramp. Now, to be fair to the design, I think the slightly off-roady bias version does look a little better and has a bit more purpose about it. But for me, this is a practical, excellent bike that's really wrapped in a crappy set of clothes. Suzuki's GSX range. Credit where credit's due, Suzuki's new range of, well, semi-naked sports touring bikes does look an awful lot better than their predecessors. These have that kind of melted wax appearance that just look blooming hideous for me. While it's true that Suzuki have made some slightly dodgy styling decisions on these bikes, the twin headlamps being a particularly major one for me, overall I think this bike works pretty well. However, the naked models go all in for the manga look. The twin headlamps stacked don't look quite as good on the naked bike as they do on the faired bike, and the tiny coloured shrouds around it and that really small screen in front of the LCD screen does nothing to enhance the design at all. Ditto the rather odd high up placement of the indicators relative to the lights. But as you move around to the side, you catch a glimpse of these rather large side panels, which along with that smaller rather flimsy winglet sticking out the side, for me simply doesn't work at all. And oddly enough, the tank looks like it's been taken from another model altogether and doesn't quite fit in with the line of the bodywork. And the highly impractical and I would say very uncomfortable rear seat section looks completely impractical again and seems to have been taken off something like a GSXR and transplanted onto this particular machine. So the ultimate result of all this mishmash of styling is a bike that doesn't look attractive and in fact actually looks as if it's been made up of a bunch of other bikes. Very much a part's been special, I'm afraid. Kawasaki's Z range. Now, in all honesty, Kawasaki's Ninja range has never been on my list of, well, bikes I'd have as a pin-up on the wall. For me, the styling of the bikes has an awkward and ungainly look to it, like a badly designed transformer, and the front end somehow looks a little bit too narrow. To be fair, that design has gradually grown on me over the years and now I've become quite accustomed to it. I wouldn't say I love it, but I don't dislike it anymore. Well, the Versys range doesn't really seem to know what it wants to be. It's got the front end of the phone that looks like a sports bike, but then the rest of the bike is sort of screaming off-road adventure bike. Which is it? I just don't know. But it's their Naked Z range which for me is particularly ugly. And the styling of these bikes is in sharp contrast to the classically styled Z range which is placed alongside it and looks for me an awful lot better. And so appropriately for a bike that's usually painted green, the front end light section looks like the head of a praying mantis, while the rest of it just comes over as, well, a mix of insectoid and transformer. But whatever it's supposed to look like, for me it just doesn't work. I find the styling of these bikes particularly nasty. For me there are too many straight lines and not enough style about the whole thing. And again, the rear seat section on a large practical bike, you would hope, is again pretty much dysfunctional and really rather ugly, and even worse, I would think extremely uncomfortable to sit on. You wouldn't get me on the back of that thing in a month of Sundays. And it just doesn't matter how powerful the engine is if the rest of the bike looks like it's been in a head-on collision with the ugly tree. Yamaha's MT range. I do generally feel that Yamaha's sporty R1 and R range generally are very pretty machines, and I think for me they're some of the best looking sports bikes out there. While their XSR range, whilst not my cup of tea personally, is an example of classic styling on a modern chassis which just about comes off, and with some of the paint jobs available, the machine has more than a whiff of classic RD350LC look about it. While the NT range, at least from the side, seems very little changed from the previous models, which were, let's be honest, a little bit on the bland side. I come round to the front and it looks like it's wearing a party mask. But while that model looks a bit transformerish, the other models look distinctly insectoid, stroke robot, stroke sci-fi. While the style of the bikes would not look out of place on, say, a science fiction movie set, I really wouldn't want to be riding one of the things down the road. Which is a pity, because these are extremely capable bikes with a very firm following, with the MT-07 being viewed as one of the very best beginner bikes you can buy. But unfortunately, Yamaha's attempt to unblandify their rather bland previous model simply doesn't come off. KTM. Now I've just said KTM here because for me the entire range is ugly. I mean really ugly. Has no one in the factory ever seen or even heard of a curved line? It's all angles and straight lines and pointiness, mixed with that bizarre insectoid look that you got from the Yamahas, but done with anything with even less panache. And all this is pretty galling because the much cheaper CRF range, which is actually designed by the same designers as the KTM range, looks far better. There are a few curves mixed in there and the whole thing has a much more organic look to it. And the thing is, this angular straight liney styling is used right across KTM's range. It's become almost their corporate image to use it. Which is a great shame, because if you really don't like the styling, well, there's nowhere else to go within the company to find something that looks that bit different. But for me, the worst of the bunch is this 790 Adventure, along with those low-slung fuel tanks which sit nicely against the engine and hang just low enough to be impacted against by pretty much any large boulder or stone that you're trying to carve through. What could possibly go wrong, we wonder? But weird fuel tank choices aside, the whole thing doesn't work for one simple reason, and that's the angular styling. Angles and straight lines do not psychologically say to anybody looking for a bike, this is going to be a comfortable ride. Even if the bike is, you're kind of suggested in the back of your mind that it's not going to be. So even as you walk up to the bike from a distance, your expectations in terms of comfort are particularly low. Not a great idea if you're trying to sell the buyer on the idea of long distance comfortable travel. Now KTM have employed this type of styling for several years now, and I've never liked it at all. It's never been a bike that would appeal to me just aesthetically with all those straight lines. And I've absolutely no doubt that there are a number of punters out there who very likely feel the same way. So what bikes or collections of bikes would you like to see us do a future video on? Maybe you've got a bike we can use in a future test ride. Either way, get in touch below. Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course thank you very much for watching.